in my early days at Albion in Evansville, and I actually did the Core 40 training as a baby social worker. And so it's always an honor to be back with you guys talking about neurobiology of trauma and today talking about burnout and self-care. And again, just like Monday, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute throughout. And then I'll definitely leave a little bit of time at the end. Today's going to be a little bit more interactive, not as much as like you having to interact with me, but we are going to do, I'm going to throw a bunch of definitions and different things at you all, but then we're also going to talk about creating our own self-care plans. So yeah, our objectives for today are to define vicarious trauma and related terms, identify our personal red flags and trauma exposure responses, and create a personal plan for stress resistance and self-care. In the early days of my work as a social worker, I read this book called Trauma Stewardship, and then I read it again a few years ago. And I'd given this presentation a few times, but after I reread the book, I kind of like revamped this whole thing. And so a lot of this is really based off of the ideas in this book. And so I really, really highly recommend reading the book. But the biggest thing from that stands out to me is a quote in the book where she says, armed with a burning passion and a tremendous commitment, but few other internal resources, talking about herself at the beginning of her career in the helping profession. And so I really related to that because I feel like as a college student going to school for social work, and like so many of us that get into this work, there's a reason and a purpose that we want to be in this role, and we want to help and support and advocate for survivors. And so sometimes we get so focused on the work that we're not thinking about internally what we're doing to take care of ourselves to create sustainability for the long haul. And I think it's so important for us to take care of ourselves so that we can stay in this work long term, because it's really not possible to do that if we're not taking care of ourselves. And so my goal for you today is for you to gain some internal resources or better identify your own resources that you already have as you begin or continue this role as sexual assault advocate. So first, vicarious trauma is a process of change resulting from empathetic engagement with trauma survivors. And secondary traumatic stress is both a physical and emotional stress response to working with trauma survivors. So vicarious trauma is more cumulative. And so it's similar to compassion fatigue. There's a lot of definitions. There's some on another slide. It's hard to fit it all in one, but I kind of talk about all of it together. But vicarious trauma is cumulative over time. So where you're doing the day in, day out work and you're not taking care of yourself, then you're continuing to take on more and more of those traumatic stories. And it begins to wear down on your nervous system and your body. Whereas secondary traumatic stress can sometimes come on more suddenly and be a bigger reaction that almost mirrors some of the traumatic responses that a survivor is experiencing. And so secondary traumatic stress may be more related to like when you're working with people who are actively in crisis. So when you've like had to go to the hospital to do advocacy, or you've had someone come into the center that's like actively in crisis, if that situation is more overwhelming to you, then that secondary traumatic stress response could come on more suddenly. Compassion fatigue is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the suffering of those you are helping. So over time, from being compassionate witnesses to the trauma that our clients have experienced, our systems can get fatigued by that. And then burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. So burnout is when one or all of these things have happened to us and it's gone unchecked. And it gets to a point like burnout is pretty much complete overwhelm where it's really hard to come back from burnout without like taking time off to really take care of yourself. And so that's why what we're talking about today is so important, because we want to protect ourselves from getting to that point of burnout. And when you've reached burnout, that's when it's not just affecting your work, but it's kind of bleeding into all the different areas of your life. In the trauma stewardship book, she uses the term trauma exposure response, which is just the fact that we are affected by the suffering of others. And that's like we're going to be impacted by the suffering of others. And so I think that's the most important thing to understand is that sometimes I think we feel like we can go into this work and like we're strong enough or like we can handle it. And so we don't do the things that we need to do to compartmentalize or take care of ourselves or, get that real rest that we need outside of our work. And so I think it's just really important to understand like this is all of these things are possible for all of us. Trauma exposure response is going to happen. Compassion fatigue, these things are going to happen, but it's how we handle them and take care of ourselves that protects us from getting to burnout. A little bit about risk factors. Obviously, like I just said, we all are at risk, like we're going to experience these things. So the risk factors are more about the degree to which you may be affected. So kind of how we talked about Monday with neurobiology of trauma, when someone has experienced more trauma, sometimes their level of distress is higher or their vulnerability to stress is lower. So they're more like at risk. And so having a history of personal trauma, especially if it's unaddressed, our own personal circumstances, which is going to change day in, day out, season in, season out for the work that we do. And we're all going to have times where our personal circumstances are going to make us more vulnerable. I've been doing this work for a long time, but in the last few years, I have experienced some loss and trauma in my own life. And so the way that I even, after being in this work for 10 plus years, I take care of myself and I have capacity for work very different than I have at other times in my career because of my own personal circumstances. Having low levels of social support, whether that's the agency that you're working at, which, when we're in, especially those of us in more rural areas, like we don't always have the resources and the support. So it's really important for us to take care of ourselves. But also just like not having social support outside of your work. Is higher risk if so really building those circles. So now she in the book talks about 16 signs of trauma exposure response. I'm going to kind of like go through all of them, but there's going to be some that I talk about more than others. And so again, if this framework for this framework of trauma stewardship, if it's interesting to you, I highly recommend picking up this book. It's really good for like a work book club. So these are signs that when you start to notice these things in yourself, it's starting to evaluate for, okay, am I getting to a point where I'm getting closer to burnout? How can I work on lessening some of this? So feeling helpless or hopeless. So when we feel personally responsible for situations that's going on with our clients or seeing situations as long-lived without possibility for relief. And so I think this is common in our field of work when we stay in it for a long time because we all would like to have these high hopes of like ending these types of violence in our lifetime. But sometimes when we get too focused on the bigger picture, it can really feel helpless and hopeless. And so trying to stay focused on like the work that you're doing day to day with the clients that you are helping. And this one kind of goes a sense that one can never do enough. So feeling like functioning from a place of tremendous urgency. So feeling like we have to get these things done rather than working from a place where we are slowly doing the work that we can, taking care of ourselves so that we have longevity for doing the work. Hypervigilance, we talked about a little bit on Monday. So that feeling of like when you're doing that scanning for safety, or that feeling of just like always being on, not being able to really calm down. Diminished creativity. So this could be like, yes, in the ways that you always think of creativity, but I really think about it as far with diminished creativity and an inability to embrace complexity, just kind of that like problem solving and your brain kind of turns off because you've just gotten to this place where like things are feeling really foggy and urgent. And so it's really hard to focus on finding new creative ways to do the work that we're doing. Minimizing, I think, the big example of this is like minimizing the things in other people's lives. So when we're like so consumed with the big things that are going on in our clients' lives, getting irritated with our partners or our kids or our friends, because it's like this, what you're talking about is like not a real problem, but that's so like minimizing other people's like their real problems in their real life because of seeing all the things that we see, which it's hard not to do that. But when it's becoming constant or you're seeing it impacting the other relationships in your life, it's be a sign of a bigger issue. Chronic exhaustion, physical ailments. And so not just like that good, tired at the end of the day, ready to get in bed to rest up for the next day, but just that chronic fatigue. And then having other physical responses, whether that's like problems with your gut health, or heart rate, headaches, muscle tension, just all the ways that like our body and our mind are so connected when you really start to see that chronic exhaustion and physical ailments. Inability to listen or deliberate avoidance, so like letting those red dots on your phone go up and up and up because just not having the capacity to respond, whether that's work or in your personal life, but just that feeling so overwhelmed that you just are avoiding or tuning out during conversations. Dissociative moments, we talked about this dissociation obviously on Monday. So this can be like zoning out, being physically present, but not hearing what someone is telling you. But it can also be some of those bigger dissociation responses that we talked about on Monday. Lack of self efficacy or feeling a lack of self efficacy. So basically just getting to a point where you feel like other people are responsible for your well-being and you don't have any like capacity or ability to control the things that are going on in your life. Guilt can be a big one. Feeling guilty for having different life or different experiences than your clients and just kind of getting stuck in that guilt. And that can really take away from like our ability to like genuinely interact with our clients. I've worked with so many clients that are like, I don't like when I work with someone and I just feel like they feel bad for me. That it's hard to like actually connect with someone when I feel like they're just, providing sympathy instead of empathy. And so I think guilt is a place where we can really get into that. Kind of an obvious one, anger and cynicism. Anger is not a bad feeling. No feelings are bad. Um, and our anger, I think a lot of times, especially maybe right now, our anger is really what like motivates us and fuels us to do the work that we're doing, that righteous anger, that feeling, those feelings of injustice. But when we get kind of stuck where that anger is like kind of trapped in our bodies, or we're really getting like really cynical, we're focusing more on like the things that we can't do and that aren't happening instead of using that anger to fuel us to do the good work. That is a big one where the can move us quickly towards burnout. Getting to a point of shutting down to where it's hard for you to empathize or just feeling numb to the work. That's, I think, when you're starting to feel that numbness, that's really getting kind of towards the burnout, or especially the vicarious trauma, because that numbing is kind of also a dissociative moment where it's like it's becoming too much. And so our mind and our body is like, we got to start slowing this down, and shuts down. Addictions, whether that's like to substances or just to other things that we put in our lives, things that we're attached to that we kind of use as negative coping skills. And then grandiosity, so like an inflated sense of importance, especially related to one's work, like getting that feeling of like, who will do this work if I don't? So like not taking a break because it feels like you're the one that has to do it, or you feel like you can do it better or differently than your coworkers or other people. And so with that feeling of like, it has to be me. So I can't stop. I can't take a break because I have to be the one to do it because I'm the only one that can do it. So yeah, just the next few slides are going to be, some of it's going to be repetitive, but I just also like to give, I think when we're trying to really assess our own trauma responses, our own stress, sometimes it helps to have a lot of different language to work from. So just these are other examples. So intrusive thoughts can be a big one, especially if you have experienced anxiety or intrusive thoughts at like other points in your life when you're experiencing high levels of stress or you're taking on other people's trauma, it's really easy for those intrusive thoughts to come in. And so just those thoughts of like, bad things happening or you yourself like doing bad things that you know you would never do, but that's, what intrusive thoughts are, not those impulsive thoughts of like, "Oh, I'm gonna like spend a bunch of money or like go on a lavish vacation." Those are impulsive thoughts, but intrusive thoughts are thoughts of like harming yourself or others that can come in very suddenly and are very uncharacteristic. We kind of talked about chronic fatigue, obviously, sadness and anger, poor concentration, I think is a big one. The more overwhelmed you get, the harder it is for you to concentrate, second guessing yourself, just feeling detachment, emotional exhaustion, fear, shame links into that guilt. Guilt is like, I did something wrong. I can do better next time. Shame is when you kind of get stuck in that cycle of like, I did something bad and I am bad. And so feeling a lot of shame is definitely a sign of secondary traumatic stress. And then, of course, those physical illnesses that come on. Okay, so now we're going to take a little bit of time for you to assess your current trauma exposure response. We're not doing a specific like secondary traumatic stress scale or stress assessment. I just want to give you guys some space for a few minutes. I'm going to try to play music. I try this every time and it never works, but I think maybe I have it right this time. We'll see. But I'm just going to give you guys like 5 minutes to just, I'll kind of click back through those slides so you can see all of it again. I just want you to think over the last 30 days, how many of, if any of these have you experienced? And once you've identified those, taking a little bit of time to think about to what degree you have been experiencing them, and not thinking over like your whole life or your whole career, but just kind of, we want to assess kind of where you're at right now. So just kind of thinking back over the last like 2 weeks to 30 days. Okay, so sorry, I will put the slides back up and I'm just going to kind of click through them so you can kind of read back through them and just take a little time to reflect on, yeah, if you've experienced any of these things and kind of to what degree. And I'm going to mute myself while you do it and drink some coffee. So next, I just want you to also think about your personal red flags. So maybe things we haven't talked about, maybe small things, but that are things that you know about yourself that show signs of stress or overwhelm. If you feel comfortable, please share some of those in the chat. I think these are just always interesting because sometimes they're things that we don't necessarily think about until someone else says, "Oh, this happens to me." And it's like, "Oh, I do that too." Like for me, I drink like way more coffee than I should when I'm stressed out, which like I know has the opposite effect, but it's like I almost don't even notice I'm doing it. So like most days I'll drink like 1 or 2 cups, but then if I'm really stressed, I'm just like going, going, going all day. I'm actually way better about it now. That's one of the things I've tried to do better in the last few years, is not doing that when I'm stressed because my nervous system's just been, kind of shot there for a while. Um, Yeah. So, so yeah, whether you share or not, just thinking a little bit about what are some of those specific personal red flags that you notice. So, yep, got another self-medicating with the caffeine, sugar, barely sleeping, difficulty sleeping. Yep, that's a good one. Yeah, forgetting small details and having less patience. Yeah, I definitely notice like the lack, like less patience, feeling irritable, getting stuck in a thought loop during stressful times. Yeah. So yeah, I think, more than anything, what we like in order to practice trauma stewardship, what we need is like intimate knowledge of our own selves and our own lives. And so I think that's why thinking also about these specific personal red flags is so important because, knowing ourselves well and how we show up when we're stressed and then how to then take care of ourselves is really important, because it takes care of ourselves and it also helps us be able to continue to take care of our clients. And someone asked in the chat, the book is literally just called Trauma Stewardship. So it's Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. And I do have the title and the authors on the resources list at the end of this. So you have these slides, I believe. And so you have that. And then also, side note, I did also send this morning, because I said Monday I would recommend some more books about like polyvagal theory and trauma and other stuff. And I do have a list and I sent that as well. So you guys should get that when you get, I don't know if you get things each day or at the end of the week, but I did provide a list for you with some book suggestions. So yeah, trauma stewardship The overall idea is a daily practice through which individuals, organizations, and societies tend to the hardship, pain, or trauma experienced by humans, other living beings, and our planet itself. By developing the deep sense of awareness needed to care for ourselves while caring for others and the world around us, we can greatly enhance our potential to work for change ethically and with integrity for generations to come. So, now as we move into talking about the more about trauma stewardship of like how we do take care of ourselves, I'm going to do this. These next slides might kind of feel a little random, but there's just a few topics that I feel like are very important to like know and understand when you're thinking about how to take care of yourself and how to create sustainability in your own life. And so first, I want to talk about the stress cycle. Authors and researchers Emily and Amelia Nagoski created in their book called Burnout. Highly recommend. It's on the resource list too. This idea of the stress cycle. So completing the stress cycle is things that you can do to help your body, specifically your nervous system, relax and reset, even if the stressor has not been handled completely. So kind of that idea of like going back to like our nervous system's primal nature of like actually being chased by like by a tiger. Our nervous system goes into flee or hide or fight. And sometimes if our nervous systems, is all stuff we talked about Monday, get stuck in that, even if the threat has passed, if our nervous system is still heightened, we need something to help process out that stress. Or if the stressor is not something that we can solve right away and it's going to take days or months or years, but we need each day to be able to help our bodies process the stress to stay healthier. These are research backed ways that are the most efficient ways to complete the stress cycle. The number one is physical activity. This is the most efficient. This is like getting that heart rate up. And so going for a range run, doing a high intensity workout class, even just like going for a walk, but getting that pace enough that you're getting your heart rate up. That helps to move that stress out of your body. Breathing, so taking deep breaths. Your inhale being or your exhale being longer than your inhale is a cue of safety to your body. Because if we have enough time to sit and really let that exhale out, we're not taking those shallow breaths like when we're running. That really is a cue to your body, like, okay, we're safe, we're present, we can do this. Social interaction, so spending time with people that you love, laughter, not just like pretending to laugh, but really getting that good belly laugh is another physical way. Like for me, I have like specific episodes of specific shows that I know are going to actually make me really laugh. And so there's like a specific episode of Parks and Rec that I watched so many times when I worked at one of my jobs because it just made me laugh so hard. And so that was one of the ways that I would complete the stress cycle. Physical affection, it needs to be like sustained, genuine. And so the research says like a 6-second kiss or a 20-second hug. I try to get a 20-second hug from my toddler, not always able to sustain the 20 seconds, you know. Crying, like crying is not it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It helps move those hormones and chemicals and gets it like you're literally shedding some of the emotion and the stress out of your body. And so even if you gotta act that cry, another thing, certain shows, movies that will make me cry are big things that I do to complete the stress cycle. Why am I going? Sorry, I was going forward instead of back. Yeah, so I also just briefly want to talk about the concept of self-compassion. Another great book that I highly recommend. I read a lot if you haven't picked up on that. But self-compassion has these three components, and I actually just want to read to you directly from the book from Dr. Kristen Neff. As I've defined it, self-compassion entails three core components. First, it requires self-kindness, that we be gentle and understanding with ourselves rather than harshly critical and judgmental. Second, it requires recognition of our common humanity, feeling connected with others in the experience of life rather than feeling isolated and alienated by our suffering. Third, it requires mindfulness, that we hold our experience in balanced awareness rather than ignoring our pain or exaggerating it. I think self compassion is just a huge thing that's important for taking care of ourselves, but it's also really important for our clients as well. And so I think I just like to kind of touch on this like super briefly that, self compassion isn't just like this love yourself. It's really these like core components of like, yes, treating yourself with kindness, treating yourself the way that you would treat someone that you love, but also that common humanity. This goes again to like staying out of that shame and that guilt, the common humanity of like, are our experiences different? And are some people experiencing bigger, scarier things than we've experienced? Yes, but suffering is a common experience for all humans, and we don't need to be isolated in that. We can better move through and heal from the suffering when we recognize that it's just part of the human condition. It's something we all experience. And then mindfulness is just staying present to that, to those emotions and those experiences and being able to move through them instead of shutting them down. So just kind of we are in a few more slides going to work on a stress resistance plan and self-care plan. So just these next two slides are kind of just throwing out some ideas. First of all, for mindfulness meditation, there are so many apps available, free ones, paid ones. Like I'm sure we all know and have heard about the Calm app. Insight Timer is a really good one because it has tons of free content. 10% Happier is another one. But if the music that I sent, the link that I sent is from a app called Indle. And it's not as much like guided meditations, but it's like more sound healing. And so just like things to listen to kind of like focus in on your breath and like help your brain feel more calm and less foggy. And then just some breathing exercises. So box breathing is the one where, kind of trace a box with your finger, 4 seconds, inhale, 4 seconds, hold, 4 seconds, exhale, 4 seconds, hold. One of my favorites is 478 because this is giving us that pause and then it's also giving us that longer exhale. So 478 is exactly how it sounds. Breathe in through your nose for 4, hold for 7, exhale through your mouth for 8. And then another mindfulness meditation suggestion is calm, safe place, which we will actually do at the end of this today. So more on that when we do it together to end. Get you guys really zenned out for the rest of your day. And then this side, of course, is just kind of like some ideas for self-care. And I'll kind of like I did the first time, I'll give you guys about 5 minutes and I'll kind of click back through these. Something I want to point out on here specifically is like the exercise, because when you're trying to complete the stress cycle, you do want to get your heart rate up quickly to like complete the stress cycle. So that is going to be more like running high intensity class. But for ongoing exercise and ongoing taking care of yourself, I think it's really important to like understand yourself and your body and what actually helps you. And so like for me, I've always been like a pretty high intensity person. And so what I've learned over the years is what's actually really helpful for me is like doing yoga because I'm slowing down. I am exercising. I am getting my heart rate up. It is good for my body, but I'm slowing down. And that's usually more what my body needs is to move more slowly, more mindfully through something. And so for some people, yoga is great. And for other people, it's not. And some people, it's like running, rock climbing, like just really knowing yourself and your body and what actually kind of helps you feel less stress and not what might like heighten some of your responses. So it's important to have a stress resistance plan. So these are things you do daily, weekly, monthly, and even annually, like taking those PTO days, taking a vacation. And it's also equally important to have a self-care plan. Those are things you do when you have a particularly stressful day or week or just feel suddenly overwhelmed. Like, what can I do right now? So like for me, it's usually like, I need to go outside, take a walk right now. So yeah, I'm just gonna give you guys time again to turn that music back on if you want. So sorry it's not working. I could have sworn I had the settings correct this time. Maybe it's something with the type of headphones I'm using. But taking some time to write down things that you already are doing or things that you'd like to add in. And really, I really recommend writing it out as like daily, weekly, monthly, annually, because all of those things are important, not just the things that we do when we're in a moment of crisis. Going backwards again. I see we do have a couple questions in the chat. I'm gonna let you guys work on this for a few minutes and then we can I will kind of give space for you guys to like share like we did about personal red flags. And so I think that'll be a good time to kind of like talk a little bit about some of the questions that are popping up. So for now, I'm going to mute and just give you guys a few minutes to work on this. I'll leave this one up for now, but if anyone does want to share, you can start putting in the chat. The question was, what if breath work makes you dizzy and more anxious? And the dizzy and anxious is, I mean, it could be, I'm not a medical provider, so could be something specific to you. But what comes to mind for me is that when we don't breathe correctly a lot of the time and then we're trying to do deep breathing, we're getting like so much oxygen at once that our body doesn't quite know what to do with it. And so I would say to start more slowly. I think that's where it's really important to do that inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, because if we're like taking deep breaths in and out of the mouth, that's like a lot of oxygen and that can make, there are types of breath work where that like dizziness, like that really physical response is what you're like actually going for. Like with holotropic breath work, that's like in and out of the mouth really quickly without the pauses in between. And that's like to create a certain type of like reaction in your body. But when we're just trying to like take those deep breaths to calm ourselves down, I would recommend like the 4-7-8 or even the box breathing, but starting really slow and just really doing that inhale slow through the nose and slowly out through the mouth. And just kind of starting to notice and pay attention to like, okay, how long am I doing this or am I noticing other things in my body? And I also think sometimes the anxiety, I think meditation can be hard for some people, especially for trauma survivors, because when we try to just like clear our minds, that's when the trauma comes in. And that's where I find like mindfulness to be a lot more helpful. And so it's not that we're focusing on trying to clear our minds, but we're focusing on something. And so focusing on maybe like counting those breaths or things that you maybe using an app so that you can like watch like a bubble getting big and small, but really trying to make it more like mindful and not just trying to clear your mind. Because I think that's sometimes where the anxiety can come in is if we're like not giving our brain something calm to focus on, and all these other things are starting to like try to come in. That's yes. So yeah, especially if you tend to hold your breath, which I have done a lot of breath work because I was like that too. And so I've spent a lot of time learning how to breathe correctly. And I still notice myself throughout the day, like all of a sudden, like if you're like sighing a lot or you notice yourself like suddenly needing to take a deep breath, that means that you're probably because of stress, you're like holding your breath or you're holding that tension in your jaw. So you're like not breathing super well. And so then when you do try to like do breath work and you're giving your body like all this oxygen that you need, then it kind of can be overwhelming. And also back at the top, I think it was you actually that said that you have cut your hours at work because you're experiencing burnout. So I'm really glad you're here. And I'm also really glad that you have that support from the place that you work, that you have had the opportunity to like take that time for yourself. So it's hard to get sometimes. All right. So people are starting to share some of the things they do. So painting, or reading to deal with stress. Reading's a big one for me. Like I find that to be a healthy dissociation. Love to just read a good book to help myself relax.
I think for me, it's an escapism
Hmm.
because their problems are so much easier to deal with. And if I get overwhelmed by those problems, I can just close the book and I'm like, hey, look, I'm not dealing with that right now. For me, reading's been just the thing I've dealt with from when I was a kid. I got bullied a lot and I didn't have a lot of friends. So I read instead. And that's carried over into my adult life. And then I went to art school. So I do a lot of painting and stuff with my hands.
Yeah, doing physical stuff and creative stuff is like really important, even if you feel like you're not good at it. It's such a good outlet. Suggestion for everyone to try painting. Dance fitness, play basketball with a partner, lots of craft projects. So there's that again, that creative expression. That's one I've tried to get better at the last few years. I'm going to go forward to this resource page just so you guys can see these titles and things. So I talked about trauma stewardship a lot, and then I talked about the stress cycle, which is from Burnout. But also, if you're not a reader, but you want to learn more about the stress cycle, when the book came out, Brene Brown had Amelia and Emily on her podcast, and they talked about the book and they talked like in detail about the stress cycle. And so I don't think she's making that podcast anymore, but I'm sure that this episode is still out there. But that's like a great way to learn more about it quickly in podcast form. Camping and riding horses. Oh, camping. I love that suggestion. I love those ones that are not those things we can do every day, but those things that we do sometimes to get away, and camping is a great one. Diamond art, I love that you said that because that is the one that I have gotten into the last like year or so. And taking a walk, that's a good one. Okay, well, let's go ahead and do this mindfulness practice. And if people keep putting stuff in the chat, I will read a few more at the end. But um, I want to do just this mindfulness practice with you guys. I find this one to be really helpful for clients and for myself. And so I just think this is like a specific thing that I can leave you with today, that we can all do together. And then this is one that you can kind of call back to. This I It's a pretty common one amongst therapists. I learned it specifically within I do a lot of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And a big part of EMDR is like resourcing before we start reprocessing trauma. And so this is one of the big resources that clients learn before we start reprocessing trauma, so that if they're feeling dysregulated, I can say, okay, take a deep breath. Let's go to your calm, safe place. So to start, I just want you to take a few deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and begin to imagine a place. It can be real or it can be imaginary, but it's somewhere that for you feels calm and safe. Begin to visualize it in your mind. When you're there, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? It could be the sun on your skin, sand under your toes, water on your feet, weight from a blanket. Really focusing in on what you feel when you're in that place. Notice if anyone else is there with you or if you are alone. As you visualize being in this place, the things that you can see and hear and feel and who might be there with you, just take some deep breaths and really settle in to being in that place. Now, I want you to think of something mildly irritating, not a big current stress or an argument with your partner, but something just mildly irritating. Think about that for a few minutes. Spilling your coffee, getting cut off in traffic, something mildly irritating. Notice what you're feeling in your body now, and then try to pull up that calm, safe place. Notice how easy or difficult that is for you. Taking a few more deep breaths to settle back into that calm place. Slowly start to bring awareness back to your body. Wiggle your fingers, blink your eyes open, and when you're ready, fully open your eyes to come back into this space. And if you want to share about your experience doing that, feel free to put that in the chat. Yeah, I just find this to be a really good resource because it's easily accessible all the time. With clients, I have them practice, okay, like throughout the week, I want you to try to like do your calm, safe place like 5 times when something, because and the reason I do the mildly irritating thing and the reason I recommend practicing it is because another callback to Monday, but like creating those pathways in our brain when we practice these things, like the mindfulness, the calm, safe place, the certain types of breathing, other coping skills, when we practice them, when we're calm, it's easier for our body and our mind to access it when we need it. And so it's harder to just be in a stressful moment and be like, oh, I'm going to try to go to a calm place. But when you know what your calm, safe place is and you've practiced it, it's a lot easier for your brain to be like, okay, this moment's feeling really stressful. I am going to take 3 minutes to go to my calm, safe place and take some deep. Any final thoughts or questions? While we were doing that, somebody said taking care of their house plants. I love that one. So they're so good. And yeah, doing the calm, safe place can be really emotional, especially depending on what your calm place is. So that's something to think about as well. Well, again, it's been so good to be with you guys earlier this week and today. I hope today was helpful.